Hello folks, and welcome to Linux for Seniors. Anyways, this is part 2 of dealing with partitions on your hard drives or USB sticks or portable USB drives. This tools can be used for any purposes. This video will be more than 2 minutes. I highly suggest you subscribe. Part 1, I discussed a tool that does the same job, GNOME disk utility, and in this distribution it's just called disks. And so I will first make mention that my channel is fairly new. You can find a lot of my videos on, if you become a subscriber, and I highly encourage that you do, on all kinds of materials. I try not to get too deep into the weeds of technical stuff, but I will have to, of course, explain some things in some terms that way, but I try not to use too much technical jargon, and that's why a lot of my videos are a little bit longer for those kind of explanations. So you can see some of the time frames on my videos. So I created this channel recently on February 9th. My previous channel I had over 450 videos. I also recommend that you watch any of my videos on a large screen if you can. And since the mobile screens or mobile devices like smartphones are too small usually for a lot of videos. Anyways, as my video channel grows, I make mention of this. You can start using the search feature, using keywords to go look through the videos. This is only available on your standard web browsers. The mobile applications normally don't have that magnifying glass here next to the About. But the magnifying glass for the mobile devices are here, and that searches all of YouTube. Hopefully that was clear. I also have some links for you. So let's move on and talk about what I talked about in the previous video and what I'm going to be talking about in this one. So anyways, I'm going to right click on this. Actually, I should just make mention. What is this distribution I'm currently using? So I'm just going to use Neofetch for this. This is Linux Mint 21, Cinnamon Desktop. Okay. These tools can be found though in a lot of Linux distributions. Okay. So I'm going to right click and hit System Settings and talk about this tool here, Disks. This tool here I talked about fairly extensively on my previous video. And this is GNOME disk utility called Disks, and it can do a lot of things for you. So watch that video to get the particulars on this thing. So in this video here, I'm going to talk about Gparted though. So I'm going to click on Linux for Seniors menu, and I am going to put in GP for Gparted. Gparted can be found on a lot of live media and you have to put in your password to open this. It can be found on your live media on if you burn your Linux images to a USB stick or DVD, you can usually find Gparted there on almost any distribution. Okay, so you can treat this in a lot of different ways. It's just Gparted. It's the application. It just happened to be, I happen to be using it on this system. Okay, now with that said, since I'm using Linux Mint, when I have this open, please be aware that if you open up your file manager, Nemo, my icon is different, that it does not show devices. Now I'm going to close this, and I want you to see that my devices will repopulate when I close this box. Okay, this is very common. This is not something that you should go, oh, there's something wrong with my system. Okay, just be aware of that. So I'm going to open up Gparted again, and I'm going to leave my file manager open. Okay, put in my password. All the devices disappeared. Just be aware of that. All right, now let's talk about this Gparted application or program. So Gparted is used to make, well, partitions for the most part. So in my previous video, I showed a very simple tool. It's called USB stick formatter. And you can format USB devices. When I say devices, I also mean external hard drives. That's an external hard drive, but it's treated as a USB stick because it's plugged into a USB port. So I have two of these devices. a 320 gigabyte spinning hard drive plugged to my computer via a USB cable. Then I have a PNY USB stick. So USB version 3, USB 3.0. PNY is the name of the manufacturer of the USB stick. Western Digital, or WDC, is just the model number of that hard drive, 320 gigabyte hard drive. Don't forget about this SDE, SDD, and all that stuff, okay? Because I'm going to talk about also properly labeling things at the same time. So how do I read this stuff? I have a lot of jumbled mess in here, don't I? I sure do. All right. So some of this is in GIB format instead of GB format. Gigabyte. It's just the way it does its math. Okay. So if you want to think about when you're purchasing a gigabyte versus GIB format, you normally don't go to the store and say, give me an 8 GIB thumb drive. You normally say, I'm looking for an 8 gigabyte thumb drive or memory stick. All right, it's just the way the math is done on calculating the space on these drives. You can look that up on the internet and see what the translation is. All right, let's move along. So let's start at the menu up here. So this is my drop-down list, and there's also up here. You can do the same thing with devices, okay? And you can click those with nice red fancy boxes or however your system treats this. So we have refresh devices, and that's a good idea if you're doing some changes. You can refresh and see information. We have the devices, and we have quit. And we have undo last operation, and some things have also keyboard equivalent. I'm not going to get into every setting in here, folks, because I don't want to confuse you to death. It's also good to have device information clicked on, so you can see information on the drive itself. So this identifies this as a Samsung Pro 2 terabyte drive, and it's in that NVMe noted by the actually that dev number. Let me make this larger. Okay, so all that means is this one happens to be one of those fancy solid state drives. Okay, again, it's in TIB format. That's what 2 terabytes translates into. Instead of TB, this is TIB. Don't want to confuse you to death. So now I can see all the partitions in here. So that's, and then if you have any pending operations, normally you just look at this last line down here. So I'm not going to click that one. So creating partition tables, I'll talk about that in a little bit, and I'm just going to use 2 examples today. And then you can also use the delete commands. Help, contents, Gparted manual. Okay, some examples. This is a USB stick, denoted by the name USB backup. Okay, so again, I can't open the file manager to go see that over here, can I? No. So what I would suggest if you're doing this is to close down that, allow this to populate, and there's my USB backup. I just verified that there's no files in it, right? So what I'm going to do is open up Gparted again. Do you want to make a shortcut of that? I'm going to do that temporarily and throw it on my desktop. So I'm going to drag that over here and leave that up for a second. Double click on that, put in my password. All right, so again, this will leave that because it's mounted. Let's go find that device. I can go in here under the device list, or I can go in here. It doesn't matter which one I use. So I'm clicking that. It says USB backup, so obviously I must be on the right one, right? Because this is mounted, that's why it's displaying it. That's the key word. If it's mounted, you can see it and leave these 2 guys up until you do something with this. So what is all this junk? All right, first of all, this is what Linux calls this device, dev SDD1. The next is what kind of file system, denoted just by usually a color, and these will change depending on the distribution you're at sometimes. But basically FAT32, File Allocation Table 32 is what that stands for. And then this, it's mounted in my media T-man backup. That's what on that mount point is. I'm trying to get a hold of this so I can stretch it out. That's the mount point in my file manager. Media folder, T-man is my user, USB backup is the name of the device because that's what I named it. That's important. Always label your stuff. Here it is again. GIB format. What is this technically? It's a 16 gigabyte thumb drive. All right, there's more information here, so I'm just going to drag it this way. Used and unused. All right. Don't want to discuss every single option in here, but I'm going to click on this squiggly looking line up here, and I'm going to right click on it. And then you noticed I cannot delete anything on here because this is mounted. You can unmount it here or unmount it here. It doesn't matter. So I'm going to unmount that. It'll disappear out of this menu. Okay, no more devices. However, I can click that and now I got a different squiggly line and I can right click and I can delete that partition. So I can, well, format it also. So I'm going to delete the partition manually. Now it's unallocated space, but it still hasn't been committed because I have one operation pending. I have a check mark here. Apply all operations. You can do this all in one shot by doing different things or just do one action at a time. So since I'm doing this Linux for seniors or anybody that may have never used this tool, I'll do it one operation at a time. But just be aware that you can eliminate the partition, create another partition, and then apply operation. It'll say 2 operations pending. Hopefully that made sense to you. So I'm going to apply the operation and delete the partition. Always think twice before pushing that button. Do you need that data that was on there before you did any of this? All right, now I'm going to hit apply. Are you sure you want to apply? Because you will lose whatever data you had on there. Yes. And make sure you're on the device you're aiming for. That's why labels become important. Okay. Operation completed successfully. It's waiting for you to close the box. You want to see the details? There you have it, including that fancy name, that SDD1. Okay. Done. Now, I have unallocated space. What can I do with this thing? I can do a lot with it. I can create new partitions, hence the word Gparted. I can also make the partition full size. Basically, don't focus too much in on this if you're a new user. Focus in more about what you can click and drag. Okay, so do I want to use all of this whopping 14.77 GIB? In other words, roughly 16 gigabytes. Remember, GIB format is different from GB. I'm going to say yes, but I can make 2 partitions out of this if I want to. I'll show that on the next example. So primary partition, leave alone. Good thing to remember. So what do I want to use? Look at all the different formats. All right, what's the most compatible with Linux, Microsoft Windows, and Apple Macs? FAT32, File Allocation 32. What are extensions of these guys in here? This extension EXT4, or 3, or 2, or even BTRFS. BTRFS is a Linux partition. Extension 2, 3, and 4 are Linux partitions. This is the more modern one. So if you recently installed your distribution using extension 4 for Linux, that's what you're using. There's others down here. Okay. Lots of different partitions. I'm going to make it simple. FAT32. I want to make it compatible with all of my 3 operating systems, Linux, Microsoft Windows, and Mac. Don't forget the label. USB backup is a good name, right? Lowercase, uppercase, doesn't matter. But more importantly, put a proper label on these things. Now I'm going to hit add. I'm not doing anything with this. I'm leaving it alone for simplicity purposes. I'm using all of the whopping 14.77 GIB. In other words, 16 gigabyte thumb drive. And I'm going to hit add. Now I have a new partition. I still have one operation pending. So basically it'll give you a list. What are you doing here? I'm creating a primary partition number 1 using FAT32, file allocation table 32, on that device, this device. It's waiting for me to push the button, Max. If you ever seen the movie Great Race, that's where I got that line from. It's a wonderful movie. A little trivia, folks. Got to have a little sense of humor once in a while. Now I'm going to press the check mark. So it's going to do the same thing. Here's the warning. So I'm going to hit yes. So I'm waiting for it to do its business. And all operations completed. And more importantly, it will scan that one more time. And this is now done. And I'm going to close Gparted to have it re-recognize my devices. Here's my backup drive. It's ready for files. So if I wanted to put some files, I don't know what I have on here. I'll just do it in 2 windows. And since this was already up there, so this is already open, so I can just I'll just grab that image, for instance. Okay, so now I have one file in that USB drive. All right, let's open this back up. Put in my password to get that thing open. Now, if you're operating these Gparted utilities on a USB stick, they normally don't ask for passwords. Okay, so again, if I wanted to select the same device, this one, I cannot do the partition because it's mounted. So I have to unmount that thing. Okay, it's still there though with the same label on it. Okay, but it's green. That means that it already has a partition, and in this case FAT32. So I have another device here. Let me bring this back up briefly. This second hard drive is actually plugged into a USB cable, and it's going to be this one right here, if you want to think about SDE or 320 gigabyte drive. So let's go find that one. Well, there's nothing that says 320, does it? No, but this is in GIB format. So the number is a little bit lower, so I can click that for a second. Ah, okay, so what is this thing? Well, it's that drive there that's called backup 3 and 4. Let me close this. That backup 3 and 4 is right here. It's a single hard drive, USB connected with 2 partitions on them. I did that in my previous video, my first part 1. So what I'm going to do is open this again, and we're going to do this. Let's say you got this drive, and that drive didn't have any information on it. So this time I'm going to go through here, and I'm going to use this one here. This is that 320 gigabyte hard drive, SDE. Can be confusing if you have lots of stuff. But as you can see, it's got 2 windows in it. And it tells me what this stuff is. Unallocated space, 32 MIBs. Again, this is that MIB thing instead of MB. And you can figure out the math. But anyways, you can look it up on the internet if you're really curious. FAT32 is how one partition called backup 3. The other partition is backup 4. It's an encrypted partition. Ooh, boy. That is going to be hard to get rid of, maybe. But let's find out if we can do this nicely. So again, I determined I did not need any files on here, so I opened up Gparted and I want to wipe this drive out, and I want to make that a single partition. Well, we need to start somewhere. So the first thing is it mounted? Well, if you right-click on this thing, it is mounted because you have an unmount command here. So I'm going to unmount that. Then I'm going to click the other side of the house and make sure that that's unmounted also. And then I'm going to click this one and say delete. Because we're going to delete both of these to make one big one out of it. So I have one operation pending. And we're going to first just get rid of this. This one's going to be tough. So, let's close the encryption and delete the partition. Do you notice what I did? I closed the encryption because that's an encrypted partition. So basically, right now I'm going to delete the partition. Now I have one operation pending, so I'm going to complete that one and hit apply. So it'll be all done and there'll be nothing, no pending. So now I have unallocated space after I dumped all that stuff out, and now I can create a new partition. Again, this is a 320 gigabyte hard drive, translation 298.09 GIB format. Trust me, it's 300 gigabytes, 320 gigabytes. And I can split this in half if I want to, and create more partitions. But I'm going to leave the simplicity alone. So primary partition, what do I want to use? Extension 4 or FAT32? Well, I'm going to make this an an external backup drive only for my Linux. Then I want to use that. Don't forget the label. So USB backup 12. I'm just throwing a number. So I used all of the space. I'm using file system extension 4 with the label of that. Again, you can label them however you want, but I do suggest you label these because a lot of people that are brand new to Linux, for instance, are having a hard time with these little letter things. The SDE part. It's how Linux identifies the drive or mounts it, or will mount it. So now I have one operation pending. So if you try to close this, it's, one operation pending. I closed it on accident. What's going to happen to all my information? Nothing. I haven't done anything to it. So don't make the mistake of hitting the wrong keys. All right, let's go back in here and go find that thing. I can either go through here or go through here. Let's go back in here. I still have unallocated space and I got to do this all over again because I goofed. Right click, new. Good practice, right? All right, all of it, primary, extension 4, yeah. Label. Leave it, again, any kind of label, and hit add. Now, complete your operation before you close that window. Let's get it done and over with. Are you sure? Yes. I'm waiting for it to complete. And again, if you're operating this off of a USB stick on any distribution that has Gparted, just keep in mind, it all depends on the speed of your computer and how old that drive is. Maybe that USB drive is a spinning hard drive like mine is. And I don't have a camera turned on, but this drive was made about 9 years ago. So it's a really old hard drive. And it's a spinning hard drive. So I'm repurposing some of my drives. So I have an old spinning hard drive that I put into a plastic enclosure, and I got that enclosure on Amazon, I think, for like $12. It was very cheap. And I just plugged in the drive, and it even came with a USB cable. That was kind of nice. Anyways, I'm done. I have a label on it. It's formatted with extension 4. I'm going to close this because I need Gparted closed on this distribution to see the file manager. So there it is right there. It's ready for files. I can start dragging files in here now. So let me open up Gparted again. All right, so I'm going to basically make mention of anything. So just be careful with your internal drives. Normally you cannot do this to the one you have booted in. That's why Gparted is also found on live mediums, because normally you don't have an operating system up and going. However, a lot of the live medium, Linux Mint offers one, and just about, I would say a lot of the distributions offer live medium, that you can boot up their file managers there too. So when you boot up the live version in a graphical environment, you also have file managers, whether it's in this case Nemo, or whether it's Thunar or Nautilus, or all these other different file managers. All right, so let me make this larger, and we'll go back and play with that 320 gig drive with the single partition called backup 12. So I'm going to make a change to this thing. It's currently locked. So I need to do what? Well, it's mounted, obviously, because I don't have a delete command in here. I'm going to unmount it. So it changes the label, the little squiggly lines going around it. So right-click on this thing. Now I have a delete command. You can also format that. But I'm going to stick with the simple one. So I'm going to delete the partition. I have one operation pending. Do I want to continue on and create a partition, or do I want to complete the process? You know what? It's always a good idea, especially if you're new to Gparted, is to complete your operations before proceeding to the next. Apply. We are done. Close. Now we have no other operations pending. Right-click on the partition, create new. I'm gonna mix it up a little bit. I'm gonna split this in half, roughly. I'm gonna drag it, click and drag whatever your mouse. In my case, it just has this weird looking drag bar. So I'm gonna go kind of in between. This is just very subjective. I'm just doing this on purpose. You know, when you get better at this, you can use the little dial jobbers here. But just keep in mind, this is my first partition when you do this. So we're going to create a partition that is compatible with everybody. FAT32. You notice the color changed. And we're going to call this one USB, because it's a USB connected spinning hard drive. USB backup. And what are we going to call that? I'll call that 13 this time, just to have a different number to play with. So let's do this and make sure that I got everything satisfied. Unless I'm used to this, then I can use these keys. If not, I'm not used to this. I use the drag bar, and I leave the primary partition and then select the file system, and then put a proper label and hit add. Now one operation is done, so I have this leftovers. Do you really have to completely format this now? No, actually you don't. You can have it formatted here and ready for files without actually doing anything with the rest of the space if you don't want to. So if I were to complete this and exit this, this will be ready to go. You can deposit files on that 143 GIB. Remember, GIB is different from GB. Or you can do this now. I would suggest you probably get this job over with. So click the unallocated space and right-click and create new. All right, so this drag bar represents the 154. You can also split this again in half. I would be dividing it in here, for instance. I'm not going to confuse you to death by doing this. So I'm going to just leave the whole space. This time I am going to use something different. So I used FAT32 on the previous partition. So I could use the first one, which is BTRFS, on the next partition. What happens when I do that? What kind of partition is this? This partition is a Linux partition. This partition cannot be viewable if I remove this USB drive from my current system and stick it on a Microsoft machine. That partition is not viewable there. And again, it's in an enclosure, USB enclosure, and I plug this USB cable connected to that enclosure on a Microsoft Windows machine. It won't see it. But I'm going to do this anyways, just to give you the exercise. Okay, so now I have two operations pending, because it needs, well, I need to complete the whole process. So I'm going to hit the check mark to get this over with. Okay, operation 0 of 2 is in process. Do you want to see the details? You can do it. And now it's finished. So it created a FAT32 partition and a BTRFS partition with these GIB sizes on that SDE drive. Again, don't focus too much on this word. All right, so now I have two partitions. However, that one there, I forgot the label again. Oh, rats. So let's delete that. And good exercise. One operation pending. Let's do this simply by doing that first. Close. Right click. Well, wait till it finishes. Right click. New. Again, I'm using all of the space. Extension 4. What do we call the last one? USB backup. Lower back. The other one was 13, so this will be 14. But we're going to use BTRFS. Even after I click the next box, that's okay. Just self-correct before you hit add. Now it'd be a good idea to look at this. Okay, so the last one was called USB backup 13. I'm calling this one 14. I used an uppercase on the last one. Do you want me to match that? Sure, why not? So USB B or USB backup 14. Let's double check our settings before we add. Primary, BTRFS, and label. We're done. Now let's do the check mark. And this time I'll only have one operation. So the previous example I showed doing this in one step, but this is now two step, or single steps in other words. All right, so no operations pending. I have the first partition is FAT32 lit up in the green zone called backup 13. This other zone is called backup 14 BTRFS. Let's go take a look at these in the file manager. And there they are, denoted by the USB symbol on this distribution. Again, I'm using Linux Mint. And that one. These are ready for files. Okay, so you don't really know how these are partitioned, do you? Well, I do now if I right-click on them. This is MS-DOS. Another translation for that is some sort of file allocation table. In this case, FAT32. Right-clicking on this backup drive, properties, says BTRFS on it. A Linux partition. Which one of these can be viewed on Microsoft Windows? Only that one. The FAT32 partition. Let's open up Gparted again. Again, normally if these are, the Gparted utility is on a live medium USB stick or DVD, you don't need a password to open this up. Mine is quite busy, as you can see. So, whether I'm using a single USB stick or whether I'm using an internal hard drive or external hard drive, these are pretty much done the same. When Gparted is used on a okay, so this is obviously a system that I installed and booted up. But if you're actually using that in a live copy, be very careful with your current hard drives, because you can destroy partitions also doing this, using this tool. So this is another internal hard drive. It's my 250. It's essentially, this is a backup drive formatted with extension 4 and BTRFS. These are actually live. I'm actually using them. But I just wanted to bring it up on the screen to let you see them. They're denoted by SDC1 and 2. That's the code that this distribution gave, or Linux gave, those drives. That's why labels are important for you as the human, as they say, or us as the humans. We like labels, so we know where we are depositing our files. Does that make sense? All right, so I know I didn't discuss all the bells and whistles in here. I just discussed the important ones. And I didn't want to overwhelm people with data. But more importantly, if you are wanting to create two partitions on this drive, for instance, this is a USB stick, you can. the USB tool here, the stick formatter tool, and these tools are available for different Linux distros also, by the way. It's just not Linux Mint. And they usually have just 3 windows. You click on the stick, as in this case, this is 16 gigabyte, denoted by 14.477 GIB. Gigabyte, GIB, different. So that's the same stick as this right here. Watch what happens when I format this thing. I'm going to leave FAT32. Again, FAT32 is the most compatible everywhere. And I'm just going to leave the label and hit format. And put in my password. This information is still being held by Gparted, so I'm going to do a refresh. That's what this comes in handy. It's going to go in and rescan everything. And if I switch these out, is it still? Yes, it is. But I want you to notice that you may have not even noticed this, but the label changed. So that kind of freaks people out sometimes when they see what I'm doing here. So what I did was I used the stick formatter tool to format that really quickly. You remember it had a different name on it earlier, but this file manager still displays it the same way. However, what I want you to notice that this tool here, this USB tool, stick formatter, I'll do this again because it's very fast. I'll use the same thing. This USB tool only does 1 partition. This time I'm going to call that test 1 and format it. Now it's done. So I'm going to refresh the devices, and there's test 1. All right, so basically the USB stick formatter tool is only used for a single partition, but let's say you want to do this fancy. I can reopen this up if you want, but more importantly, I'm going to leave it like this. So the first thing I'm going to do is take test 1. I want to make this in half because I can do this in this tool, but I can't use the simple USB stick formatter tool for this. So I'm going to delete that partition on purpose. So again, it must not be mounted because I have a delete command, correct? Otherwise, it will have an unmount command. All right, hopefully that was clear. I have 1 operation pending. Again, probably is a good idea to do this all in one shot. Or is it individual operations? I would say individual operations to get you comfortable. Now that's done with the USB stick. Now I'm going to right click on this gray box and hit new, and I'm going to divide this in half. So grab a hold of that thing, and it's all subjective if you're just doing this. So roughly that's half, yes? I'll do the first one with FAT32. I'm going to call it, I'm just going to give that a label, and I'll call that test 2 and do that. 1 operation pending. Do we want to complete this now? Probably a good idea. Okay, so that partition is done, right? So basically, this partition is the one that's lit up in the funky looking green line, and that's called test 2. Unallocated space. You notice this switching, and again, if I wanted to view device information, I can do it this way. Still the PNY USB stick. So I'll leave that box up. Right click, new. I'm going to use the remaining space. I could still divide this in half if I wanted to by dragging this bar. Yeah, it's pretty versatile. So what do we want to use on the next one? How about a Linux partition or even an NTFS partition? You can use either one. It doesn't matter. I'm going to use extension 4. Excuse me. That's a Linux partition. What did we call our other one again? We called it test 2. So let's call this one test 3. It doesn't matter uppercase or lowercase. I'm just giving you a label. All right, so we have some pending operations. We have a partition being created with extension 4. Okay, complete. And you can watch the details if you like. Forget about this number business. And it's done. Go. Now I have test 2 and test 3. Partitions are FAT32 and extension 4. I'm going to close and open up my file manager. So we are looking for this and that. If I get confused, what's the best way on this file manager is to right click and hit properties. It has to be mounted though. And what happens when I take a single USB stick and try to click that? It'll unmount both of them. They're both unmounted. My PNY USB stick is a single USB stick with 2 partitions. I am going to reinsert the USB stick because normally that's what you have to do with USB sticks or USB portable drives unless they have an on and off switch. My portable hard drive does, but the USB stick does not. So test 1 and 2 are currently mounted. Right click, properties. MS-DOS, another translation, FAT32. That's the file system. Partition. Right click, properties. File system is either extension 3 or 4. In this case, we know it's 4. I verified that. What's another tool in my previous video that I used? Right click, system settings, disks. The 16 gigabyte thumb drive is what I was playing with. Test 2, test 3, extension 4, FAT32. Says that right down here. Hopefully you will watch the first part of this video that I have discussing this tool here. Okay, this is a great tool actually. However, a lot of people also want to know about Gparted. So again, when you open up Gparted on an installed machine, you normally have to put in your password. If the Gparted is on a USB stick or DVD bootable medium, they normally don't require the passwords. And again, you can't partition your own hard drive unless you're actually not booted into it. Let's put it that way. But you can still use Gparted even for that job. So that's my NVMe drive that I'm currently using this whole operating system on. It even displays that one. Okay, it's a 2 terabyte drive and 1.82 TIBs. Remember, TBs and TIBs are different. That can be confusing too to people. All right, so you have contents for help. Again, this is Gparted. And refresh devices, device list, quit, and not gonna, well, you got undo last operation also. That's of course before you commit. And let me move on to here. Now the creation of the partition table, I still suggest you just right click on that for right now. So these commands here are found when I'm doing this stuff. So I have to unmount anything. I'm certainly not going to unmount my booted up system. It will really make a mess if I try to do this, or even give me an error in this case. But I can do that to the other hard drives though, because I'm not booted into those. A little too much information for some maybe. But this is a USB. Let me click the view device information. So this just denotes the name of the enclosure that I'm currently using. And I plugged in that hard drive into that enclosure. The WD just means it's a Western Digital hard drive with that serial number on it. That is the size of the drive in GIB format, and these are the 2 partitions on that drive. A FAT32 denoted in green, and a BTRFS partition denoted in, I don't know, we can call it brown or orange. And here's the labels. You want to make this a little bit larger. Now you have everything that you look for. What are these things? This mount point means is in your distribution is how they're mounted. Example of that is if they are mounted, then this will display it here while Gparted is open in this distribution. If I unmount them, they won't show in here. Okay, so that's the mount point. Let me click on this one for a second. because this is 13. Again, there's no files, but I could start depositing files. So that's the path. It's /media, tman is my username, USB backup 13 is what that's called, and that's exactly what that says. I know that some folks, this is too much information, but again, if you clicked on this video, you may have wanted a little bit of information on how this stuff works. There is a lot more to this than meets the eye, trust me. I am just showing you some of the simple to medium type of commands that you can do in here. So on that note, I will say thank you for watching, and hopefully you have subscribed to Linux for Seniors. You folks have a wonderful day. Thank you for watching.